Norwich. This is the first time I've ever been here without driving, because 2 months ago we moved from Windsor. We've been there for 7.5 years to Scotland, so back home, to close to where I grew up, a wee village called Bridge of Allen, just 2 miles from William Wallace's monument. But actually I went there to William Wallace's monument, and you know William Wallace was featured in the film Braveheart with Mel Gibson. There's a statue of William Wallace, and it's actually Mel Gibson. It's uncannily like Mel Gibson. They must have done it for Hollywood, because all of a sudden everyone in the world, all the Americans and stuff, are coming to Bridge of Allen, where I live, and just to see William Wallace's monument. So my back garden looks onto it in Stirling Castle, which is really, really cool. And partly one of the reasons we moved is we've got a 13-month-old Labrador called Oscar. My partner Elizabeth's an actress and filmmaker. It's often joked that this is our first Oscar. but it was okay when he was a wee Andrex puppy. We had this tiny little garden in Windsor that's like 3.5 metres square. But now we've got like a garden that's like 35 metres, so it's great because he's a fully grown dog. So part of the reason we moved was for him. And I'm talking because I feel like a dad. That's what it feels like. Because I am actually his daddy. That's what, not what he calls me, what I call myself. So this is the first time I've ever not taken the car. I took the long way. I actually flew from Edinburgh to London and then got the train up. Long story, but I hadn't really thought it through very well. I tend to leave travel things to the last minute. One of these things that I do. So 9 hours later, after leaving the house, I arrived in Norwich. But anyway, so good to be here. Tonight's subject is, for me, it's a huge subject. And I took on this subject last September, on a day that I will remember for a long, long time. And I've given loads of talks. I've spoken to like thousands of people at the same time. I mean, I've spoken in New York City, and in a big auditorium, half the size of a football stadium, and there are all these different talks. And I've even been to talks on self-love, but for me it was all intellectual. And it was just to hear the words, and I would even say to people, you need to love yourself more, but never really questioning to myself what that actually means. And I think when I was growing up, you didn't really love yourself, because in the village that I grew up in, a wee village called Banknock in central Scotland, if you showed any kind of exuberance or anything, the term used was, if he or she was chocolate, they'd eat themselves. and that was the phrase. So being good at something or celebrating yourself in any way was kind of frowned upon. Certainly in Scotland, where I grew up, people seemed to prefer that we were all the same. And so anyone who was thriving in any kind of way, maybe that's just my perception, but the perception was that people would try to pull you back. And I got bullied a lot when I was at school. And part of the bullying was because I was good at stuff, and I used to, nowadays, if one of your children or nieces or nephews or grandchildren do something, you say, oh yeah, that's really great, brilliant. And my dad did that, reinforced us. But when I was at school, and I was good at stuff, I said, isn't it amazing what I've just done? I was suddenly a big head. And so part of my coping strategy was playing myself down. But it's funny how when you play yourself down and talk, as a coping strategy, it eventually wires into your brain. And unconsciously, what eventually happens is you start to, without realising, you believe your own words, and your nervous system starts processing what you've been telling yourself about yourself, even though you intellectually don't really believe it, but your nervous system doesn't know the difference, and what happens eventually, it kind of wires in. And I hadn't really thought about what self-love actually was, because I think we all think it's, I think certainly when my mistaken idea of self-love was, you've got to say, look at me, I'm great. But that isn't, that's just a part of, that's one natural expression of when you feel high self-esteem or high self-worth. But it expresses itself in many ways, self-respect and even things like confidence and courage. All of these things are related to self-love. And I was, last year, September the 15th last year, I was standing on stage at the SACC in Glasgow, which is Glasgow's biggest conference centre. And I was next speaker on after Wayne Dyer. And it was a big conference, big person, I can do it conferences. There's one in London on Saturday I'm speaking at. And this was a dream for me because I had resigned from my job as a scientist. For those of you who don't know much about me, I used to be a scientist in one of the world's biggest drug companies. And part of my job was to build cardiovascular and cancer drugs. So I was the guy, a PhD in organic chemistry, so basically I stuck atoms together and built complicated molecules, all different shapes, that had a particular quality that would switch on and off different switches in the body, designed almost surgically. Chemists let me design drugs specifically surgical to switch on and off little things, and it was really, really cool science. But I was captivated by the placebo effect, because when we sent the drugs for trials, you found so many people recovered or made improvements on placebos, and sometimes with cardiovascular drugs, which is my main field, sometimes with cardiovascular drugs, people improving on the placebos was almost sometimes a percentage difference between drug and placebo. And it wasn't the drug didn't work, it was just believing in the drug or believing in the doctor had such a high effect it almost masked the strength of the drug itself. And I was fascinated with that, so I resigned and started studying. So I started studying the mind-body connection and how that relates to the average person in your ordinary living life. You know, how is it that your thinking, emotions have an effect on the health of your body? And I remember doing my first public event, and I'd left the job. You know, I'd been at a big personal development seminar. You know, Tony Robbins, big giant American. I'd been at one of Tony Robbins, Unleash the Power Within. It was Cardiff, 1999. We'd walked over fire, hot coals, done all that stuff. And I was really pumped up, and I decided that I was going to leave my job. And my dream was to do this, you know, to talk, to explain how stuff works, to talk about, you know, science and spirituality, compassion and kindness. I've always had this idea that a small group of people with compassion and kindness in their hearts can change the world. And I think I've always been looking for evidence of the interrelatedness and the interconnectedness of life, and things like studying the butterfly effect, or what is now known as the law of sensitive dependence upon initial conditions, a scientific name, and studying how it is that little acts of kindness can have a ripple effect and theoretically and practically make a huge difference around in people's lives. And I was studying all that kind of stuff, and I really wanted to go out and teach all this stuff. And here it was doing my first public event. And one person responded to my 8 weeks of advertising in the Big Issue. I was trying to support the homeless. I advertised £141 per 2 weeks in the Big Issue in Scotland. 8 weeks, and I hired the Big Issue conference centre, a room about this size. And after 8 weeks advertising, one person came. But I filled the room out with family and friends. And people I met in a cafe the week before who only came if they didn't have to pay, and at that time I was desperate just to get bums and seats. So I had 13 people, and the event cost me £1,000. I was out, you know, almost a sixth of all the money I had in the world that I'd left the industry with, and I thought I'll be broke in 2 months, because I've got another event in Edinburgh the following week which I cancelled because no one had responded to my advertising.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I'm feeling really unwell. I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, that's fine.
I didn't want to just walk out.
Yes, absolutely fine.
I'm so looking forward to seeing you, and I'm so sorry.
I love myself so much I wouldn't take it personally. I might have done a year ago. I'm only kidding.